Welcome everybody to the Sensus Fidelium Hour. This is your host Steve Cunningham of Sensus Fidelium YouTube and sensusfidelium.com. Wanted to talk a little bit about, I'll let the philosopher Axl Rose speak on exactly what this topic is.
All we need is just a little patience.
Patience. There's a virtue that we need, and it goes in with penance, how we treat each other, charity, etc. And there was a book that I never heard of before, but a monk from the friend order that I like, the Transalpine Redemptorists in Scotland, he's actually in Papa Strance. He did a multi-part episodes on this Bishop Olenweier, I think his name is, on the perfection of Christian patience. It has just a development of about 9 or 10 of his lectures of this old bishop from the 1800s, and it is fantastic. It has helped me exponentially in learning patience, because I'm not a very patient person sometimes, most of the time. But I just almost finished the book. I mean, it goes through all these different aspects of patience. It is fantastic. It's out of print. I hope somebody ends up republishing it. But anyway, let me get, just like the last couple episodes, put him on to explain a couple chapters in the book on patience.
2 days ago, I spoke on the live stream about the virtue of patience. How patience is needed for the perfection of charity, because we find ourselves easily moved by our passions, which seek to dominate our reason and to drag us down with them. Patience is needed to overcome these, and in that way, to be able for us to gain the possession of our souls. It is very closely linked with the virtue of humility, because once humility has established a firm foundation, patience consolidates the work that humility has done. So today, I would like to carry on examining this virtue with Bishop William Ullathorne of Birmingham, who follows in the footsteps of the saints as our guide in this respect. The next point that Bishop Ullathorne makes is that to understand the importance of the virtue of patience, we should consider how all moral evil has arisen from impatience. When God created the angels and our first parents, they were created in a good state, and they received the grace they needed to love God and to cling to Him as their supreme good. This included both charity to love and patience to endure the tests that God would give them in order to prove that they truly loved Him above all else. But because they also had free will, they were exposed to the danger of losing this grace. If they would patiently persevere in loving God, they would remain sinless. But if they would yield to temptation, they would lose what patience they had and would become sinful, weak, irritable, separated from God, and divided within themselves. Tertullian speaks of the first sin of Satan and also of the first sin of Adam as being sins of impatience. He says, as patience is found in God, we must expect to find the first adversary of patience in the first enemy of God. We detect the birth of impatience in Satan, when he could not patiently endure that God should subject all that he had created to his image in man. Then it was that his impatience conspired with his malice. Adam, again, would never have fallen had he stood with patience within the divine commandment. He was innocent, he was the friend of God. He was in possession of paradise. But in losing patience, he fell from the wisdom of God and ceased to be capable of divine things. Cast out of paradise, he became a man of the earth, and was easily taken hold of by impatience in things offensive to God. Look upon the catalog of sins, and you will find that they all begin with the loss of patience. For evil is impatience of good. No one is impure who is not impatient of purity, or unjust who is not impatient of justice, or unquiet who is not impatient of tranquility. Whoever is evil is impatient of good. And thus far, Tertullian. Patience is to be found in the will, and in the will it performs a double office. On the one hand, it holds the will firmly to what is reasonable, to what is good, to what is just, and to what is true. On the other hand, it holds the will away from what is the exact opposite of these: the unreasonable, the sinful, the unjust, and the untrue. Patience exercises this double effect in the acts of each of the other virtues. In faith, patience holds the will to firmly believe with constancy what God has revealed. At the same time, it holds the will away from believing error and from doing anything that would undermine faith. In hope, the virtue of hope, patience holds the will to a firm confidence in the mercy and promises of God. And at the same time, it holds the will away from being cast down by sadness and from anything that would lessen confidence in God. In charity, patience holds the will to persevere in love and gratitude towards God, while holding the will away from whatever would weaken or threaten the love of God. And the same is true of all the other virtues. In short, as St. Cyprian says, patience is not only the keeper of good, but the preventer of evil, repelling what is adverse to good. Obedient to the Holy Ghost, it adheres to celestial and divine things, and standing in opposition to those solicitations of the body that assault and capture the soul, it contends for the virtues as from a fortress of strength. Thus far, St. Cyprian. Why does the virtue patience exercise this double effect on the will? The reason for this is because the will itself, in every decision it makes, involves a double action. On the one hand, it advances towards what it loves and desires. At the same time, it moves away from what it dislikes and hates. If the will is virtuous, then, it moves towards what is good, because that is what is desirable to it, and away from what is sinful, because the soul hates sin. This very movement, away from what is sinful, often requires a much stronger effort than the effort of desiring what is good. And this is important because it shows one of the greatest proofs that the human will is truly free. Because the act of patience takes place in the will, it must not be confused with sentiments or feelings. You may not feel like you're patient when you're struggling to keep from saying something rude to someone who's really getting on your nerves. But if you resist this temptation, you are actually practicing the virtue of patience, even though you might not feel like it. You may not feel like you're patient when you're struggling to keep from complaining about some sickness that you are enduring. But if you decide to suffer it for the love of God and resist the temptation to complain, you are actually practicing the virtue of patience. You may not feel patient when you are struggling with a strong inclination towards taking pleasure in impure thoughts. But as long as you resist and make the effort to turn away from these thoughts, to pray for help to overcome them, you're practicing the virtue of patience in suffering those temptations. And again, you may not feel patient when you're trying to pray and finding yourself battered by distractions. But as long as they are not voluntary, and you keep trying to turn your attention back to God, you are not only practicing the virtue of patience, but you are also praying well. Although patience resides in the will, the fall has done a lot of damage to our will.
Are you a man searching for the truth? Find answers and fellowship in the Carolina Catholic Man Cave every Saturday from noon until 7 p.m. only on the Carolina Catholic Media Network. The Catholic Church sends us into a bruised and broken world. No matter how busy we are or how much we struggle to make sense of the madness around us, we are called to perform a work of great value for the evangelization of the world. In 2015, a small group of local media pioneers listened and answered this call of the Second Vatican Council, and Carolina Catholic Radio was born. Today, we are the Carolina Catholic Media Network and broadcast the truth of Jesus Christ on 7 distinct platforms to meet the demands of today's media consumers. Our network produces more original local programming than nearly any other EWTN affiliate nationwide, and each of our hosts are committed to educate, inform, inspire, and enrich lives no matter where they are on their journey of faith. Catholic media consumption has a direct impact on our lives. It helps us learn, teach, and practice our faith. And in a world that seeks to cancel the truth, we need it more than ever before. Now, through the end of 2022, we need your support and ask you to join our Circle of Friends giving campaign. As a Carolina Catholic community, we invite you to sponsor or join a circle with those whom you live, practice, and share passion for the faith. Consider sponsoring a circle to memorialize a loved one by asking your friends and family to donate to us in their honor. Or join a circle sponsored by your favorite local program host. There are many possibilities. It is together as a circle of friends, our voice, our community, and our faith will be strong, leaving a legacy for those who follow our footsteps. Join us today at carolinacatholicmedia.org.
Welcome back. It's Steve with Sensus Fidelium Hours coming at you with another kind of like video show, video insight. This is how I roll anyways in Sensus Fidelium. I use what the guys that do good anyways, that already do it. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. If they already say something way smarter than I, which isn't that hard, I just use their stuff and collaborate and get it out to more. So here's continuation of the previous video we just saw. The last couple minutes, and I'll get into another one because he did a multi-point presentation on patience, as we said before.
Weakening it considerably. So what this means is that left to itself, the will is so weak and so easily knocked back and forth by curiosity, by a short attention span, and so on. That it needs a foundation stronger than human nature itself, and a motive higher than human nature can supply in order to remain firm. And this foundation is to be found in God Himself, who gives the soul the grace needed to strengthen it. The motive that is greater and stronger than all others, higher than human nature can supply, is the light and love of God. We come then to what Bishop Olathorn regards as the common definition of Christian patience, which is the virtue that strengthens the soul to resist provocations and temptations, and to endure afflictions, so as neither to give up the good of virtue nor to commit sin. Though this definition is broad enough to include all forms of the virtue of patience, it is important to remember that patience is first and foremost an interior virtue. Any exterior calmness in the face of difficulties or sufferings is worth nothing by itself if there is no interior spirit of patience. Without the true interior spirit of patience, it is but a sham. Nevertheless, as the virtue of patience grows in our interior, it also ought to overflow into our exterior conduct over time. And such was the case, for example, with St. Francis de Sales, who struggled severely against temptations to anger. But gradually, he learned to master himself to such an extent that I believe it was St. Vincent de Paul who said of him that he knew no man more meek, more patient, less inclined to anger than St. Francis de Sales. But this was not something natural or easy. It was the effect of many prayers and much effort to acquire the virtue of patience. And since, as we also need this same virtue, let us, like him, turn to our Divine Redeemer, to our Mother Perpetual Succor, and to pray for an increase in this virtue. May our Divine Redeemer and our Mother Perpetual Succor bless you abundantly. The last time I gave the live stream notices, we took a look at sadness as an enemy of patience, relying on the works of Bishop Olathorn of Birmingham and of the Jesuit priest Father Alphonsus Rodriguez. We saw that sadness, this kind of harmful sadness, not good sorrow, but this dangerous sadness, leads to sinful anger, and that it also follows in the footsteps of that same sinful anger. So now, having looked at that, let us continue with the virtue of patience. Bishop Olathorn raises an important point, that although patience should be first and foremost in our interior, in the depths of our soul, our interior patience needs to gradually express itself exteriorly as well. It overflows, so to speak. And a major reason for this is because Christian patience is one of the most perfect sources of edification for our neighbor. And he gives a story from the life of St. Francis Xavier to show this. When St. Francis Xavier brought the gospel into Japan, on the first occasion on which it was heard, in the city of Amanguchi, the saint and his companion, John Fernandez, met with great opposition, especially among the bonzes, the Buddhist monks, you might say. When an action of St. Francis's companion did not a little contribute to the gaining over the most stubborn. Fernandez preached in one of the most frequented places of the town, and among the crowd were some persons of great wit, strongly opinioned of their sect, who could not conceive the maxims of the gospel, and who heard the preacher with no other intention than to make sport of him. In the middle of the sermon, a man in the crowd drew near to Fernandez, as if he were to whisper something to him, and then spat in his face. Fernandez, without saying a word, or making the least sign that he was concerned, took out his handkerchief, wiped his face, and continued preaching. Everyone was surprised at the moderation of the preacher, and those who had at first laughed at him being insulted like this suddenly began to admire his patience and sincerely acknowledged that a man who was so master of his passions as to command them on such an occasion must be endued with great courage and heroic fortitude. One of the chief members of the assembly discovered something else in this unshaken patience. He considered that a law which taught such patience and such insensibility to insults could only come from heaven, and argued thus with himself. These preachers, who with so much constancy endure the vilest injuries, cannot pretend to deceive us. It would cost them too dear a price, and no man will deceive another at his own expense. He only who made the heart of man can place in it so great a tranquility. The force of nature cannot reach so far, and this Christian patience must proceed from some divine principle. These people cannot but have some infallible assurance of the doctrine they believe and the recompense which they expect. For in fine, they are ready to suffer all things for their God and have no human expectations. After all, what inconvenience or danger can it be to embrace their law? If what they tell us of eternity be true, I shall be eternally miserable in not believing it. And suppose there is no life but this, is it not better to follow a religion which elevates a man above himself, and which gives him an unalterable peace, than to profess sects which continue us in our weakness, and which want the power to appease the disorders of the heart? This man then made his inward reflections on these things, as he afterwards declared. And these considerations, being accompanied with motions of grace, as soon as the sermon was ended, he confessed that the virtue of the preacher had convinced him. He desired baptism and received it with great solemnity. This illustrious conversion was followed with answerable success. Many who had a glimmering of the truth and feared to know more plainly now opened their eyes to the light of the gospel. Thus far, Bishop Althorn taken from A Life of St. Francis Xavier. There are several points worth taking away from this story. The first is that in order for the virtue of patience to edify someone else, it needs to be genuine, which means, above all, it must be primarily in our interior, in our thoughts. The Stoics were famous for their outward calmness in the face of sufferings. They held that to become angry or upset by sufferings, and especially to manifest this through complaints, grumbling, or emotional outbursts, was simply to make the suffering worse. Suffering is unavoidable. I only make it worse by not quietly enduring it. This is true, but this is not Christian patience. Christian patience goes beyond this to recognize much more. It recognizes that even if on the outside I remain calm, if I consent to the temptation to unjust anger or sadness in my thoughts, this is a sin that causes damage to my soul.
We'll finish this on the other side of this break.
On January 31st, 2019, Carolina Catholic Media signed on Charlotte's first Catholic radio station, AM 1270 WCGC. By the grace of God, we celebrate the past 4 years and look forward to continuing our apostolic vision and mission to serve the Carolina Catholic community. We are evangelistic partners with our clergy, active parishioners, the fallen away, and the homebound. We are accessible to all Christians, agnostics, and atheists. With distribution of a wide array of content across 7 media platforms, there truly is something for everyone. During these past 4 years, Carolina Catholic has expanded to 7 media platforms that include radio, internet stream, mobile app, website, YouTube, social media, and e-newsletter. Nearly all local programs are available by podcast and video on demand. In the year ahead, we're committed to promote more local parish, school, and ministry events, more live broadcasts, and more valuable content that showcases our dynamic local Carolina Catholic community. Of all the Catholic radio stations in the U.S., Carolina Catholic is arguably a leader in locally produced programs. To continue our work, Carolina Catholic Media needs $15,000 in monthly funding to continue operations across our 7 media platforms. We are 100% dependent on your generosity. If you love what we're doing, please join us with a monthly tithe or annual gift. We have partnership plans available for parishes, schools, and ministries. If you own a business, you can be a program sponsor on one or all of our platforms. You can do a live broadcast of a special event with promotion before and rebroadcast after. On behalf of everyone at Carolina Catholic Media, we thank you for your past support and look forward to you joining us with the resources the apostolate needs to continue to evangelize the truth of Jesus Christ and our Catholic faith across the Carolinas. May God bless you and your family abundantly.
Faith and charity are key elements of life, but are they at the center of your retirement planning and life insurance decisions? Knights of Columbus, a trusted organization with a proud history of more than 140 years of helping its members, can help Catholic families with insurance and retirement planning solutions. Most importantly, we do this in a way that is compatible with Catholic teaching and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops' investment guidelines. Today, we have expanded our offerings to include retirement annuities, long-term care insurance, and disability income insurance. Beyond the benefits of financial protection, members may take satisfaction in knowing that Knights of Columbus contributes to causes that align with Catholic moral teaching. Let your faith inspire your financial decisions. Terms and conditions apply. Learn more by calling Field Agent Bob Gordon at 516-551-7838.
Welcome back to the Sensus Fidelium Hour. Steve Cunningham. Let me get right back to our, I guess you would say, lecture on patience by one of the monks of the Transalpine Redemptorists.
Furthermore, the Catholic understanding of the virtue of patience recognizes that I need grace from God in order to raise up my soul to the perfection of this virtue. We are not alone, locked inside ourselves, trying to sort ourselves out by our own natural powers. No, we who have the gift of sanctifying grace have God present in our souls. We have the source of our strength right close at hand, available for the asking. This is why St. Catherine of Siena, through her own example, tells us to form a little cell in our soul where we can turn and recollect ourselves and be alone with God, no matter how busy we are, to form a little sanctuary into which the world and its cares shall never enter, a center of peace into which no trouble shall be allowed to come, so that when troubles come, that come to all, they may be kept by the intervention of patience outside of that secret sanctuary of the soul, and never be allowed to come between the soul and God. The second point from this story is that the genuine practice of the virtue of patience should manifest itself through our exterior conduct if we are to edify our neighbor. In the first ages of the church, conversions were numerous, and it is good to ask why. Certainly grace was moving many souls. Certainly there was zealous preaching on the part of the apostles and the early disciples. Certainly there was mutual charity among Christians that served to edify many of the pagans. Behold, these Christians, how they love one another. But there was also something else. There was the patience of the martyrs, a patience that was utterly foreign to the pagan world, turning it from an evil to be avoided in our souls. It is quite a common saying that good example converts more people than words. This saying also tends to not be taken to heart so well because we don't see instant results. We desire to give good example, and we make efforts along that line. But it often seems that those around us just don't get what we were trying to hint at. Let us remember, though, that the purpose that our patience is meant to serve when it comes to edifying our neighbor. If our patience is supernatural, a patience that receives its strength and its perfection through grace, this is something that a worldly person who is not in the state of grace, acting on his own natural powers alone, cannot properly imitate. Nor can he be properly moved by it in order to make, say, an act of faith, like the one that the Japanese leader made. To be moved to faith, a person needs grace, even if it is just a simple, actual grace. And this is a gift from God that he gives as he wills, when he wills. So, what is the point of practicing patience in order to edify our neighbor? Let's think of it this way. Through our acts of Christian patience, through developing this habit, we open ourselves up and remove obstacles so that God can work his providence through us. Through the prayers and the efforts we make to practice the virtue of patience, we freely choose to cooperate with God's work of redemption by allowing him to use us in such a way that he can move the heart of the other person to look at our patience and to see the patience of Christ. To see that this patience could only come from a divine source, and to see that this divine source is the source of all our happiness. Let us continue then to pray for light and grace, to be able to practice the virtue of patience. Let us remember that not only does our salvation depend on this, but that God desires to use our example to to bring about the salvation of others as well. And let us generously make the effort to practice it in the troubles and trials of this life. May our divine Redeemer. So I mentioned earlier that in this life, the saints had a certain sort of foretaste of the happiness that they now enjoy in heaven. And after having treated a little bit on the virtue of patience in the last several live streams, I'd like to turn now to one of the primary obstacles to patience and to our salvation, which is sadness. The last few times when I spoke on the virtue of patience, I treated of this virtue following in the footsteps of Bishop William Olathorn of Birmingham, who was bishop there during the mid-1800s. We had previously taken a look at sinful anger and vexation as being opposed to the virtue of patience. But ordinarily, anger arises from sadness and ends in sadness. So now it is time to turn to that and to see how much of an obstacle it is. And to do this, I hope to look at, once again, the works of Bishop William Olathorn and also of the Jesuit Father Alphonsus Rodriguez. The book of Ecclesiasticus in the Bible says this about sadness: "Cast sadness far from thee, because it has killed many and is good for nothing." St. John Cassian says that sadness is a disease more dangerous and harder to be cured than all other spiritual infirmities. "Beware," he says, "of admitting sadness into your soul, for if it once gets possession of you, it will soon take away your relish for prayer and spiritual reading. It will make you think them tedious and cause you to afford to each less time than ordinary. Nay, sometimes it will make you quite leave off both. And lastly, it will diffuse over all your spiritual exercises so much disgust and irksomeness that it will be almost impossible for you to continue them." Why is this? Bishop Olathorn says, "Every inordinate outbreak of impatience, vexation, or anger is accompanied with sadness and terminates in greater sadness." He says, "Self-love is wounded, pride humiliated, vanity disappointed and put to shame, and sadness follows, depressing the soul, enfeebling the spirit, clouding the mind, warping the judgment, and paralyzing all generous virtue. The tendency of sadness is to brood over oneself and consider oneself as an ill-used and disappointed creature, deserving of better things. Then the fumes of melancholy take possession of the heart, which becomes sullen, heavy, and bitter, and finds a miserable satisfaction in nursing the wounds of self-love in loneliness of soul, as though God and our friends were our adversaries." So we see from Bishop Olathorn that sadness involves a turning away from God and our neighbor, and a turning inwards upon ourselves. And that is why it is opposed to a life of prayer, because prayer is directed towards God, and real prayer presupposes maintaining the presence of God. But giving away to sadness is a movement towards self-love. Cardinal Cajetan, the great commentator on the works of St. Thomas Aquinas, says that while cheerfulness looks to what we love and desire, sadness looks to what we do not like and would not have.
We'll finish this on the other side of the break for the final segment. He's got plenty of more. There's like 5 different ones of these, so I'm just giving you 3 of them right now.
The Catholic Church sends us into a bruised and broken world. No matter how busy we are or how much we struggle to make sense of the madness around us, we are called to perform a work of great value for the evangelization of the world. In 2015, a small group of local media pioneers listened and answered this call of the Second Vatican Council, and Carolina Catholic Radio was born. Today, we are the Carolina Catholic Media Network and broadcast the truth of Jesus Christ on 7 distinct platforms to meet the demands of today's media consumers. Our network produces more original local programming than nearly any other EWTN affiliate nationwide, and each of our hosts are committed to educate, inform, inspire, and enrich lives no matter where they are on their journey of faith. Catholic media consumption has a direct impact on our lives. It helps us learn, teach, and practice our faith. And in a world that seeks to cancel the truth, we need it more than ever before. Now, through the end of 2022, we need your support and ask you to join our Circle of Friends giving campaign. As a Carolina Catholic community, we invite you to sponsor or join a circle with those whom you live, practice, and share passion for the faith. Consider sponsoring a circle to memorialize a loved one by asking your friends and family to donate to us in their honor. Or join a circle sponsored by your favorite local program host. There are many possibilities. It is together as a circle of friends, our voice, our community, and our faith will be strong, leaving a legacy for those who follow our footsteps. Join us today at carolinacatholicmedia.org. Are you a man searching for the truth? Find answers and fellowship in the Carolina Catholic Man Cave every Saturday from noon until 7 p.m. only on the Carolina Catholic Media Network.
Welcome back to the Sensus Fidelium Hour. It's your Steve Cunningham, your host. Finishing up, maybe part 1 of the finishing up of this little lecture on patience with one of the monks from the Papastranze Redemptorists, Transalpine Redemptorists in Papastranze.
And what we do not like, we hold in fear. And fear is much less in our power than those delightful thoughts that inspire cheerfulness. If, then, we take a morbid pleasure in sadness, it becomes far more injurious to the soul than the fear of evil. We must not forget that the virtues are connected with each other, and that charity is patient. But as charity prefers God to all things, it must prefer God to all those things that sadden the soul. And as Christian patience is caused by charity, and cannot exist without charity, whatever we have to suffer should be endured with patience for the sake of the greatest good. It is for the love of God and the doing of His will. So we see from Cardinal Cajetan that sadness takes us away from the greatest good, which is the good of charity. And it turns us and puts us in a position of discontented self-love. So patience, then, is needed to protect charity by enabling it to endure suffering. on the immediate cause of our discomfort, suffering, or inconvenience, rather than looking beyond it to the first and ultimate cause. I'm sad because so-and-so said something rude to me. Or I'm sad because I believe such and such a person thinks badly about me. Or I'm sad because now I have to do this job that I didn't want to do. The problem here is that the sad person forgets to look beyond the immediate cause to God's will. The wind that destroyed the house, the robbers that came in and stole the cattle out of the fields, and the malice of Satan were only secondary causes of the sufferings of Job. But he was able to look beyond them to the first cause, which was God's will. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job could see that God desired his perfection. God desired to prove Job's love for him, and sending occasions of suffering was the means that he had chosen or permitted for doing this. And it is the same for us. And this is where it is quite useful for us to occasionally go back and read the small pamphlet written by our Holy Father St. Alphonsus on uniformity with God's will. Not only because our perfection consists in this uniformity, but because it overcomes the sadness which is rooted in pride, which is one of the chief obstacles to that perfection. So, having said that, what is the remedy for sadness? The Apostle St. James sums up what all the other saints say, that the chief remedy is prayer. If any one of you is sad, says St. James, let him pray. This requires a strong and difficult effort at first, because, as Bishop Ollithorne says, sadness broods in selfishness, and is inclined to rest rather in our own unhappy thoughts than in God. The sad person turns to prayer with reluctance. So, in order to overcome this reluctance, we must begin with vocal prayer and persevere in that vocal prayer in order to obtain the right disposition before resuming recollected mental prayer. That's, again, is why St. Alphonsus is so keen on short ejaculations. They help us to begin that process of overcoming this harmful sadness in order to dispose us to being able to devote a greater period of time to mental prayer. Why is prayer so helpful for overcoming sadness? If you think about it, have you ever had it where you were troubled about something and you found that by speaking to someone about it, by unloading, so to speak, you felt like a heavy load was lifted off you? Father Rodriguez, writing to Religious, speaks about this, saying, oftentimes, the conversation of a friend is sufficient to drive away our discontent and to give us joy. What consolation and sweetness, therefore, ought we, with greater reason to hope for, and find in our conversation with God? It is not, therefore, in conversing with men, nor in reading profane authors, nor in the harmony of music, nor in other worldly amusements, that religious ought to seek ease or help against sadness. They must seek it at God's feet by means of prayer, and it is there that they will infallibly find true joy and consolation. And I might add to that since sadness is a temptation that can easily afflict any one of us, whether a religious or a lay person, the same holds true, that prayer is and ought to be our first response to sadness. The second remedy, according to Bishop Oliphant, is to break out of it by some external act of kindness or generosity. For the malady consists in a morbid concentration upon one's self and a brooding within oneself that repels sympathy and kindness, as being adverse to this melancholy mood, a mood that can only be cherished in isolation of spirit. But let the will make a little effort to be kind and considerate towards another, and it is amazing how that malignant charm is broken, and that held the soul spellbound to her saddened thoughts and imaginary grievances. A smile, a kind look, a few gentle words, a considerate action, though begun with effort, will suffice to open the soul and set the spirit free from its delusion. Action, again, in the line of duty, and from the sense of duty, will enable the soul to throw off the morbidity with which she is encumbered, and by the return to more cheerful thoughts, she will recover her patience. So let us be quick to recognize whenever sadness threatens to overwhelm us, and let us make good use of the remedies that God has provided in order to overcome these temptations, which can easily drag us away from Him. Let us make an effort to multiply short ejaculations, as St. Alphonsus so constantly recommends, especially that favorite prayer of St. Alphonsus, the Irish monks, and the Desert Fathers, and many other saints. Deus in adiutorium meum intende, Domine ad adiuvandum me festina. O God, come to my aid. O Lord, make haste to help me. Let us remember that our actions are done in the presence of God. And let us say to Him, O my God, how can I be sad in Thy presence? Thou that art the source of all joy and comfort. And let us be quick to go out of ourselves to make acts of charity towards our neighbor, even something as simple as a smile or a kind word. May our Divine Redeemer and our Mother of Perpetual Succor bless you abundantly. The Holy Rosary will follow in a few minutes.
Yeah, patience. One of those things that we need more of, but we don't know. Maybe we don't know how to act on it, how to grow it, how to work on it. And there's more. The anger video I have right here, and many others, how to practice patience of Christ. Maybe I'll do that next time. I know I said that the last time I was supposed to do another one, this one, but oh well, it was in my head all day. Axl Rose was playing in my head, just a little more patience. So I figured, why not do patience? Anyways, so yeah, check out there. It's on the Transalpine Redemptorist YouTube channel. Just go to their YouTube channel and type in patience in the search, and you'll see a smorgasbord on it. They post every day. They do some kind of lesson, 3 lessons a day in the lesson, and then they do rosary and other devotionals throughout. So if you've got an hour and a half during this with Lent's coming up, maybe that's something you could do. If you don't, you can join in on there, subscribe. They'll put an alert when they come out, when they start going live, or do it later. And you'll sit there and you'll get a catechism class right off the bat. They read from Glorious of Mary, something from Alphonsus. Alphonsus wrote Glorious of Mary. Something else, usually by Alphonsus, and then they'll get into their main notice, is what they call it. And that goes on for 12, 15, 20 minutes. Usually maybe a saint of the day, a lesson of the day, something, what is forgiveness? What is this? And they do a fantastic job. And they are, monks of the church, straight out from St. Alphonsus' sons. And I think it was Pope Benedict XIV that said, to be a Redemptorist is the easiest way to get to heaven. And these guys are rock solid. So check them out. Anyways, well, God love you. Have a great rest of the week. And I'll talk to you guys next week. Steve Cunningham with Sensus Fidelium Hour. Have a good one.